Okay, here we are back with part two. We'll kick it off with cost management. So with cost management, the cost control includes monitoring cost performance along the way. Remember, this is about monitoring and controlling. So one of the things we can do is expert judgment, right? That's specialized knowledge of an individual or a group. Notice it's a group too. I can do data analysis. I can use a project management information system or PIMS. That can be anything. It can be an electronic board. It can be a paper. It can be a SharePoint. It can be Excel. You have to define your project management information system. And then I want to make sure that I control the costs. So I have TCPI. TCPI is one way to control it because when I have my graph and I have my normal S curve right there in green, notice my budget at completion is at the end of the S curve. But if my project is off course, estimate at completion can end up being higher. And so TCPI is meant to be a way to get back to budget at completion. How do I get back there? TCPI says basically, for the money I have left, how can I complete the work that's left? That's what TCPI is solving for you. I love the what went wrong, but they're covered in the book, so I'll leave it at that. Quality management is another important aspect of integration and control for you. Notice it's about verified deliverables. Verified deliverables. I'm going to go back to red. You verify deliverables as the project manager through the quality control process. What I love about quality is I see it as a key, a very important subset of scope. Scope is about requirements. Quality are about standards, which are requirements set by the government regulations, corporate policy, stakeholders, customers, etc. So it's about standards that must be met. Notice how important it is. You will verify the deliverables in your quality control process. This is what you do to verify deliverables. Notice in the process we talked about in the last lesson called validate scope, that's when the customer is going to do quality control themselves to validate what you validated and make sure it's right. So this is a very important process. Lots of tools you can use, checklists, check sheets, also called tally sheets. Inspection is one of my favorite, used all the time, and testing is probably my next favorite. We're going to go over some of these tools in a minute. In fact, here are the 7 basic quality tools. Cause and effect diagram is really about root cause. It goes by lots of names. We're going to talk about that in a minute. A check sheet I mentioned was a tally sheet. Control charts are about monitoring your process over time. And we're going to talk about the rest of these. A histogram is just a bar chart. A Pareto chart is a rearranged bar chart. Scatter diagram compares 2 variables, X and Y, and stratification. So here is, as quality tools go, for controlling a cause and effect diagram. Notice it's also called a fishbone diagram. It looks like fish bones laying there. This would be the head of the fish where you put the problem. And it's also called a YY diagram because look at this. Well, why is our low course ratings a problem? Well, it might be you're brainstorming with your team. Graphics, might be speed, might be content. Well, why content? Well, it might be this, right? You can see that's why, until you can't ask why anymore, getting to root cause. Here's a simple check sheet. And so you might, well, one time it was a broken link on this day, and once on this day, and 3 days on this day. Spelling error only happened on this day, and 3 times on this day. Wrong format happened twice here, once here, 3 times here, and you're just tallying up the total, maybe doing some division to get the analysis that you're looking for. Now, this is a control chart. And a control chart, I want to note, it has an upper control limit. You can see that here, and it has a lower control limit. You can see that here. You want your data to fall within the upper and lower control limit. When your data doesn't, like right here, it is assigned what we call a cause code, and you have to then do root cause analysis, like the fishbone diagram we just looked at. But there's a second time when you would want to assign a cause code, not just when it's outside of the upper or lower control limits. And the other time you do it is called the rule of 7. I just wrote as R7 on the screen. But notice I'll do it in green this time. I have 7 data points here in a row that did not change direction. Well, that's not natural. Life has natural variation, and that's why the data points go up and down in between the control limits. We don't care. That's good. But when there's 7 in a row, there's no longer natural variation. That's the rule of 7, and you'd want to assign a cause code to that as well. Another tool in qualities I mentioned was a histogram. That's just simple bar chart, right? Which is a nice way to see which of your problems are your most important and then have discussions about it. A type of bar chart is called the Pareto chart, and all it did was reorder from most often to least often the issues you're coming up with. So as a project manager, I say, man, we need to tackle this issue first. But if you have the time or the resources or they're related, let's tackle these issues. Notice if I tackle the first 2 issues, I'm covering about 80% of my problems right away, which is great. Okay. I mentioned a scatter diagram has a y-axis and an x-axis, so I'm just assessing 2 variables. This one actually says, as I plot the data, that I have a general negative trend, right? Here's a simple run chart as you run the data as appropriate. A flow chart. Notice on a flow chart, a diagram is always where the decision has to be made. And yet here it's yes or no. You'll go in different directions. Okay, kind of a humorous note here, but you can pause and review that. Now, I did want to say this. There are, in project management, 3 estimating processes, okay? And one of those estimating processes is your schedule, okay? Let's see if I can get my pen to write. It's not gonna. All right, is your schedule. The other estimating process is cost. Resource also has an estimating process. So those 3 are nearly identical in their processes. So consider that. When you're thinking about cost, you should be thinking about the cost of resources, facilities, people, how a manager is paid more than an analyst. So do I need 2 managers? Maybe I can get 1 manager and 3 analysts, get the work done faster. Now I just impacted schedule during my estimate. And of course, cost. There's a budget cap to all of this. So resource management, very important and related to schedule and cost as well. Now, I said most projects fail because scope was not met, or it followed through to completion, or it wasn't identified. Problem, right? I also said in schedule that most of your focus will be on the schedule. Well, that's why 90% of what you do as a project manager, 90% of what you do is communicating, because you're communicating quite often the scope issues, you're communicating quite often the schedule issues, right, as you spend most of your time. And what are you communicating? Not just talking to people. It's not a phone number. It's not a cell phone list. It's not an email list. You're communicating data. You've been collecting data from the plan, comparing it to the actual data, and you are creating graphs, charts, spreadsheets, and sharing that with the right stakeholders for input, for knowledge, etc. So speaking of stakeholders, nowadays, so I turn now to stakeholder management. The thing about stakeholder management is, and now my writing on my slides is starting to overlap, stakeholder management today is called stakeholder engagement. So I'm going to line through management. It's actually stakeholder engagement. We engage stakeholders. Remember, stakeholders are so important to us. They are a means of defining success on your project, as well as the triple constraint, maintaining the balance between scope, schedule, and cost, as well as offering new strategy or knowledge to the company. Stakeholder satisfaction is a means to success on a project. So you'll want to keep them aware. I love the video highlights. I do. Review this, more said on the book. I love it. Now, risk management is very important because remember, traditional / waterfall / predictive projects, that's 3 names that we use for the same offering, is all risk-based. We're trying to manage risks. So this becomes very important. As a risk manager, your risk management team will want to identify risks and also create workarounds for those risks. Now remember, a risk by definition, let's see if it'll erase from here a little bit. Hey, it is. Remember, a risk by definition, I'll erase some of it, is also do it in green. A risk by definition is an uncertainty. So risk is an uncertainty. And that uncertainty, risk equals an uncertainty, is either a threat or it's an opportunity, right? So you just don't know. And that's why we compare the plan versus the actual along the way and continue to assess it. Now, one of the things we also do is we keep a risk register. Risk register is really just a funny name. It's just a name for list, right? We have a stakeholder register as well. That's a list of stakeholders. And we call it a register because it has some additional data. That's nice. So a risk register basically is a list of risks, right? So you want to list the risks, potential risk owners, as well as potential early on responses. You'll develop them over time as needed. Now, procurement management is very important. One of the things about it, so you can't make or build everything for your project. Sometimes you have to contract out, and that's what procurement means. It means contracting. So a procurement manager is also really a contract manager. Well, procurement management is funny because remember, who's responsible for the project? Yes, you are the project manager. That's true. And it is even in procurement. The problem is you don't have the authority by law to commit the company's funds. Only a procurement manager does. So what I always emphasize, project manager, create a great relationship with your procurement manager. Have a relationship with them. They don't know the scope you're trying to accommodate. Only you do. So you've got to express it so they can get it in the contract properly. The standards, the schedule timing, the quality effort, etc. So change control, build change control into it. That's natural in the project you've just built, but not natural to the seller who will sign the contract and become your vendor. Right? So you want to build that in. Have a good relationship with them. Go to the negotiations with them if you can. Because you want to watch out on a contract for constructive change orders. Say you go and you tell the contractor or one of your team members, hey, I'd sure love to see this on the project. They're going to take that as an order, right? Even though they didn't have the authority. So you want to be careful. You want to have set people that will monitor, do the reports, collect the reports from the contractor. You can inspect whenever the contract says so, etc. Here's a sample contract closure notice. And notice that one of the great things about project management is resiliency. Resiliency is a term that we should all add to our lexicon. How do we absorb impacts or recover from a setback quickly? So think of that as you plan your projects. Now, agile and traditional projects often come together, create hybrids, and we use different terms like velocity for schedule, and we do different graphs for metrics like burn down charts, like burn up charts is another one, or we could even use just the simple velocity chart. That really concludes part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did, and I will see you online.